bright light. You keep on burning and you shine all night. Your life's for living, it ain't for changing. The song's for loving, it ain't for saving. You can't shape the river, you can't shape the flow. Don't change your heart, babe, don't change your soul.
Welcome, everybody, to Picks and Bones. I'm your host, Eric. I'm bringing you the best in Americana, black dirt, red dirt, Carolina clay, and good old American rock and roll. Today, we have the honor of sitting down with Chris Boone, Charleston, South Carolina's own Americana extraordinaire. How you doing today, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you on the show. So, kind of give everybody an idea of where you are in the musical spectrum and what you've got going on these days.
Sure. Well, I've been playing for quite a long time. This is my 8th season going in, or playing rather, just full time as a profession. I'm working on my 6th album, and I'm somewhat of a world traveler. I claim the upstate of South Carolina as home, but I was born in Virginia and lived in Belgium and France and California and New York, and I've been all over the place. So I'm currently focusing on another album and playing about 150 gigs a year, and just keeping my nose to the grindstone, pushing through.
Nice segue to a Childers song.
Yeah. Yes. I didn't mean that slipped out. I realized I've been listening to a little bit too much Tyler lately.
Yeah, haven't we all? I mean, come on, right. The guy's incredible.
Seemed to sort of pop out of nowhere.
Really, he did. And, rightfully so. I mean, and he's doing it on his own. And, you've got to respect that because, this whole new genre of people coming up, they're not doing the whole record label thing and they're not doing the Nashville thing. They're doing their own thing. Yeah. And you've been
it's interesting. Go ahead.
No, and you are doing the same thing.
Pretty much. And, what I've discovered playing full time and really getting into it, your head starts to swirl. I think we all start off with, the fantasy of being a star. You're inspired as a young person by some musical talent that really moves you, and it drives you to learn an instrument or to learn to sing or write, and you create your first product. I remember mine was I was a piano player, and I played with a friend of mine who's since passed away, Phil Chastain, and he would play drums and I'd play the keyboard, and we would take old cassettes and put Scotch tape over the 2 holes that are punched out of the top of the cassette, and we'd put the tape back into a cassette player and hit record and play at the same time. And if you had the Scotch tape over those holes, it would act like a complete cycle, and you could re-record over whatever crappy cassette you had that you didn't want to listen to anymore, and record yourself live in the room. Now, it's dating myself quite a bit. But,
I remember those days, man. What are you talking about?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That was great.
Anybody with a little bit of salt does remember those days, I've found. So, what's funny is, you start off with these aspirations. And for me, I got lucky in a way that my very first gig was opening for Jewel, for her. My first album on cassette. I happened to drop it off at a place that she was going to have a gig at, and they threw me on the bill. And so I got a little excited. Of course, I played 3 songs. It was me with my backup guy on bass, and I had no real idea what I was doing. And of course, not much came from it. I was still a really, really green player, but you keep that drive alive. And then eventually, you have to make up some decisions of what you're going to do with your life. Are you going to keep, playing with a band and try to get 1 or 2 gigs a month? Or are you going to start doing cover gigs? And where I'm at now, I realize that, you can wear many hats as long as you just look at it as I am a musician. I don't let the venue define me. You know, you may be playing a place that some people would feel embarrassed to play. I feel like, hey, man, if people want you to pay, if you're getting a little remuneration, a little bit of pay or something, dinner, what, you know, go and do your gig.
Exactly.
And now that's paying off. You know, now I'm finding people. I sell 3 of my latest albums for $10 a piece, or you can buy all 3 for $20. And so I find that I sell a lot of those package deals at gigs. I throw in a couple of stickers, business card. Now, you know, we're getting house concerts, and you can kind of feel it out just based on who shows up. Sometimes they want covers. Sometimes they start asking for your originals. I had some dude from Hawaii show up to my gig with his wife and 3 kids, and he was holding up his phone in some bold print, and, you know, he had requests from songs that I haven't played in a decade. I was like, who the hell is this guy? You know?
Yeah, right.
And then, you know, half the time people don't know who Neil Young is. So yeah, it's all over the place. But I find that, you know, that taking away that mentality of trying to, quote, make it, you know, whatever the media tells you is success, gives you a lot of breathing room to then go out and get your own hustle on and see where you fit in, you know, in the world.
Well, let's go back to something that you just mentioned a minute ago. I'm seeing a growing trend in people doing house shows.
Uh-huh.
How do you like that? I mean, you've got to. I mean, I know, you know, at least all the musicians that I'm friends with and I talk to, everybody's biggest frustration is, you know, they're playing a show and people in the audience just aren't paying attention. They're playing on their phones. They're being loud. They're being raucous, but they're not paying attention to the music. They just paid $5 to $10 to get in to hear you, but then they don't listen. You
know, I've got a secret formula for when people don't listen. I turn down. I don't turn up. And when people have to strain to listen to you a little bit, all of a sudden the room gets quieter. And I use the same tactic in restaurants and places because you never know what little corner they're going to slice out for you to do your thing. And if you try to compete with the crowd, you're going to lose or piss people off. They're just going to go outside so they can talk. I mean, we live in a really self-serving world now. And I'm not trying to get political or weird or anything like that, but people are, you know, they're about themselves. You know, the selfie stick was a great invention. It's like the freaking cell phone, you know, right?
Yeah.
So it's about people. Like, it's a lot easier to sell a T-shirt than it is a CD because a T-shirt is something somebody can wear. It's about them, you know. So I find that with house concerts, you know, I played somebody's kitchen. Guy wanted me to play for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours in his kitchen, and I had a gig earlier that day, and I quoted him, I think $300 or something. It was just me and a small speaker and a, you know, soundboard, made it sound right, and you know, I have the advantage of having about 5 hours of covers in my book. I'm not going to pretend like, you know, I'm going to memorize all these songs. So there'll be a little music stand right there. I'm not going to stare at it, but, you know, if I need to glance over, sure.
Right.
And then, you know, you start building a relationship with the audience. What I found recently is that when you just communicate with people, you find one anchor in the crowd, one person that kind of cares a little bit. And then there's things like kids, man. I've got 2 children of my own, so I bring a bunch of small tambourines and egg shakers. And the kids are always bored. The parents are secretly guilty that they've got, you know, their kids there.
Yeah.
Engage the kids, give them a chance, you know, play a song like Blue Skies by Tom Waits. It's in a waltz beat. It's a 3/4 timing. So you're teaching the kids. They get to get up on stage with you. Then all of a sudden, you've got everybody's attention. The cell phones come up, they're videotaping you, and you engage a little bit, work with somebody, and then you can kind of drive the audience. But also understanding that, you know, as long as I get to do what I do for a living and be professional about it and have fun, then I don't really care if you're into it or not. You know,
right.
I've gotten to beyond that point. I played my 939th gig the other day since we moved back here. In 2013, I have spreadsheets. I'm really probably overly organized, but you know, I have a vision of what I want to do, and I realize not everybody fits into that, you know. So, yeah, if you need to talk or be on your cell phone, that's cool. You know, if you want to listen, that'd be great.
You're still getting paid.
That's right.
As long as the
And
check
people
clears,
often-
we're good.
Yeah, that's right. And I've played events before where, I had to do a mobile deposit on my phone because I was playing somewhere 2 hours from home, and I was handed a check from a personal account, and sure enough, the check didn't clear. I had to call the guy on it before I left the parking lot. He said, oh, right, that was from the wrong account. Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
So we fixed that. But that doesn't happen often. I find that most people are grateful. I have to say, too, that, there was a time where I kind of dreaded every gig. It was like, not this again, probably around 650, 700 shows. And that's not a lifetime because I've been playing for a whole lot longer than that. In the thousands, I'm sure. But something that, clicked in my mind. And I said to myself, well, look, you need to just, assume the fact that this is what you're going to do till you die. Money will come, money will go, budgets will go up, they'll go down. Some nights will be great. Some nights won't, but you need to fall back in love with the fact that you get to take one of your two Martin guitars, and have it strung properly, tuned properly, and you get to go and have that vibrational experience, and that's your job.
So damn hard, we could barely speak. Or work in the restaurant, so made us wait.
It's not a pocket protector with crappy pins and a shirt that you feel uncomfortable in, or in an office with terrible lighting. No, you get to actually harmonize and vibrate on a musical level. Be grateful for that.
Well, you actually get, for a few hours each night, you get to enrich somebody's life, including your own.
That's right.
So, you're putting positivity into the world where there's so much negativity. And there's a lot of people that would love to be able to do what you're doing.
Right.
So, yeah, I get that. I'm doing that with my show right now. I know. It's
awesome.
This is the life. So, I'm either going to be a success or I'm going to still do it. I just can't, I'm not giving up because, I came off stage about 10 years ago and I haven't been back on like with a band aspect. So this is my way of staying connected.
Nice.
So
I think it's a great thing you're doing. I felt honored to be able, I saw your thing pop up on Facebook and I was like, dude, that sounds so cool. What is this? And you start thinking about, there was a time in my life where, I think it's real easy living in a capitalistic society to be money driven. It's just kind of the way we're conditioned, right?
Yes.
And I think there comes a point at which you learn how not to lose money, but also you realize that there's a time and a place for exchange of currency. And there's also a whole lot of room in the middle to share, take your time, get interested in other people. Somebody asked me the other day, they were like, do you play a lot at Folly Beach? Because here in Charleston, Folly Beach is 9 miles away. And I was like, honestly, I don't. Folly Beach is kind of a place, I have played there a bunch in the past, but I've realized that they like to cater to the people who live out there because there's a lot of musicians who actually live on Folly Beach. I said, so,
kind of like
Folly
Sullivan's
Beach,
Island too. I mean, there's a lot of musicians out there.
There are, but not as many, and they'll actually hire people from the mainland, if you will. With Folly, there's so many that I think they pick a few guys and they put them, you're Mr. Every Friday night at such and such place, right? Mm-hmm. And, I could compete with that, but truth be told, Folly Beach is more of a party city, party town, so it's super late night, which I don't like playing. And quite honestly, it's very seasonal, so the budgets are not right, not really good. So I told someone, I was like, Folly Beach is a place where I like to go and hear other people play. And it's nice to be able to do that in your own town, play a tour, be a tourist once in a while and not
Oh yeah. Well, and
always
even,
try to be on the seas.
well, and you strike me as with you saying that, you're kind of giving back to the same scene that's brought you up by when you do go and listen to other local artists and everything, you're just strengthening your community. You're strengthening everybody's pride in what you're doing, and that just makes everybody stronger in the long run. I know.
Sure.
We've been kind of having a discussion and a movement up this way, because I'm in upstate. That when people talk music, and I love all music and I love all forms of country. I love the Americana. I love red dirt, black dirt, all of it. But it seems like people don't think, there's not a legitimacy. If you're not from Texas, you can't play any kind of red dirt. And I think so many people, and this is something we've been talking about a lot with artists, over the last few episodes, that there was Carolina before there was Texas.
That's right.
And, here's where our immigrants and our forefathers landed and brought the, everything from, Scotland and Ireland. You've got the banjo music that came from, the slaves. You've got, all that got amalgamated to create what we're lovingly referring to as Carolina clay music. Because the Carolinas and Georgia deserve their own leg and genre, if you will. Because it's not, you're not going to get, you could fake a Texas sound, which you're not going to get respect that way. But if you're doing your own thing and you're sticking true to it, because Carolina music has those notes of bluegrass with it.
Right.
And that's where you're not going to really find that beyond here. You're going to find a little bit. Because everybody digs what they dig. But I think that's, I think that's what's becoming a more driving factor is people want to have their own identity. And, you being a Carolina musician, I know, it doesn't, if you're just, you don't want to only be tagged in, only do Americana music, which that's just American music. And people, what is it, 20 years ago, somebody decided, we're going to stick a label on this.
I think of Americana is when your shit kind of doesn't actually have a face, that faceless music. You just call it Americana. It's a broad stroking, to me anyway.
Oh yeah, and go ahead.
I was saying, I know it's supposed to have hints of country, hints of bluegrass, hints of folk, anti-folk. Man, it could have some crossover of a little rock and roll and blues, right?
Yeah.
And then you shake that up in a cocktail, strain it out, and it's Americana.
Well, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. Because, there's rock and roll bands that are as Americana and as they come, and people don't really recognize that. I know I've got a friend that was a touring musician for a number of years. When he listens, if you listen to music with him, he's going to be like, somebody's going to be like, oh yeah, that's, that's pop. That's, whatever. And he goes, nope, you're all wrong. That's just rock and roll. Right. And he goes, and you can't define rock and roll. Rock and roll speaks for itself. And just like, everybody else, they're speaking for themselves. He said, don't try to pigeonhole and put everything in a box.
Well, I think, and rock and roll pretty much just came about once the guitar was introduced, right?
Yeah.
Because before that, everything was from, everything was horns and piano and vocals, and there was popular music. And then you had Chuck Berry and stuff like that came onto the scene, and they created this, I was watching this the other day, the history of the guitar, and it was really interesting because it created this rebellion in the youth, and they ripped apart an amphitheater, tore up the chairs and seats. There was is always an underpinning frustration in society and has been since the history and since the dawn of man, right?
Yeah.
And for some reason, the guitar and being able to hit those arpeggiated notes as individual, not just chords, but the running the scales and playing that tickled something in the human psyche, something in the human brain, and people went nuts and were able to look at rock and roll and the guitar in particular as a form of, expressing themselves and rebelling against things that they felt repressed against, I guess.
I think it fed their angst.
Yeah.
Because, we've all been teenagers and we've all been angsty, and we needed some way to express that in a way where we weren't out being destructive. Well, some of us weren't out being destructive.
Right.
But, but you needed something to fuel that. When I was coming up, that was 80s hair metal. It suited the purpose, and it allowed you to get out that, pent up energy and aggression that you wouldn't normally have a venue to do that with.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how'd you even get started in music?
How did I get started?
Yeah. Let's take a turn.
I'm sorry. Did you say let's take a time out?
No, I said let's take a turn. So how did you get started?
Yeah. So, my Aunt Lois and Uncle Leroy lived on a farm out in Ware Shoals, South Carolina, outside of Greenwood. And they lived down this half-mile long dirt road. And they had dogs, yard dogs. They had a tractor and a bunch of plots of crops growing, from corn to tomatoes to okra. It had it all. And as a young kid, we would go out there and spend either, a week or a couple of weeks with them in the summertime. And my Aunt Lois would play piano, and she had one of these upright pianos that, these super old pianos that probably hadn't been tuned in a while, but because they get played so often, they're still pleasant to listen to.
Yeah, I've got one of
those. They
have
yeah, they've got that awkward sound to them where they just sound,
creepy,
crickety, if you will.
Yeah, and creepy.
Yeah. And I remember watching her play, and I was probably 6 years old, and when no one was around, I would sit down, and just something about the autosensory reaction that happened in my brain when I was able to put my fingers on those weighted keys and have the sounds come out was just amazing. And I would watch her. She'd play gospel hymns, and I would watch her play the gospel hymns and watch how her fingers moved. And I kind of got some patterns put together. And before I knew it, I was able to sit down and play. So I taught myself by ear. And I remember I was about 7 years old, and I was in there playing an arpeggiation of chords up and down the neck. And my mom and dad, they were like, "Oh, that's beautiful. Aunt Lois, what? Where's Aunt Lois?" I'm like, "I don't know. I haven't seen her in about an hour." And they were like, "Has that been you in here playing?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I remember my parents looked at each other and they said, "Well, we're going to have to get him piano lessons, at this point." So at that point, I became kind of obsessed, addicted. I'd break into churches. I would, if we were at a function with the family and we were in a place where there was a spread for a buffet, I could just tell if there was a piano somewhere in the building,
You just sensed it.
And I would go and hunt down that damn piano and play on it. So I took lessons. I always got frustrated. I wasn't good at sight reading. I have dyslexia, so I see things backwards sometimes, which is good because you use both hemispheres of your brain, but it's also bad in that you're not someone who can easily sight read. So in classical piano, I would memorize these concertos. And that's why I could only play 5 or 6 a semester, and the other kids were learning, 20, 25, because they would just sit there and read the sheet music. So I really got hooked on piano, did about 4 years of classical piano, and then finally I told my dad, I was like, "Look, I just want to quit. I don't want to do this anymore." I was getting bullied at school a little bit, that kind of thing. And he was like, "Well, what's it going to take to keep you in music?" And I said, "Well, a keyboard, an electric keyboard, so I can join a band, So he said, okay. And he bought me a Roland Juno 106. It was either that or the Yamaha DX7. And after much debate, I picked the Roland Juno 106, which I still have to this day in my closet. It doesn't really work anymore. And got a big old PV KB300 amp. And I joined a rock and roll band. I didn't get to play on every song, but when we were doing Ronnie James Dio, Like a Rainbow in the Dark,
Mm-hmm.
I had my part. You know,
absolutely.
We were playing Mr. Crowley, Ozzy. You know, we even did some Striper. We did all kinds of stuff. You know, Bon Jovi, Runaway, whatever. I had, you know, the keyboards in there. And I wasn't great at that, but it still gave me a feeling of purpose and weekly band rehearsal. And, you know, we'd go and play these gigs where you'd open for some other band, North Carolina, and, you know, play a set or whatever. I kind of kept the dream alive. And then in college, I joined a Grateful Dead cover band and played the keyboards with them. Then graduated college, and I was living with my parents had just separated. I was living with my dad in California and my girlfriend at the time. We just landed there, and I decided, you know, we tried to start over in California. My father had an acoustic guitar, a nylon string, so classical style, like you'd play flamenco on. And I happened to have a Bob Dylan songbook from the piano days, and it had the chords illustrated on top. And I already knew how to play, you know, I already knew music theory pretty well. So I put together these chords and just learned how to hold them. And I was like, wow, this is pretty easy. And the thing about it is with a guitar, you can sing. With a piano, it's very difficult. It's actually a percussion instrument. A lot of people think of it as a string instrument because there's strings in the back of the piano, but it's not. So it's kind of like singing to a musical drum.
Not everybody's Elton John.
Right. I mean, hats off to those people who can do it. I've gotten better at it now. But to sing to a song, I would much rather pick the guitar than the piano. It's just easier. So I taught myself guitar, and I think it's like anything in life. If you just do it, you know, all the time, eventually you're going to get proficient at what you do. And so I never thought I would end up at this age being a full-time musician. But when we moved back to South Carolina from Portland, Oregon in 2012, I was struggling to find work, and I was back in, you know, food and beverage, bartending, and one night you make $45, one night you make $300. You just never know. You're cut early, you're let go, you're
Been
there
there,
till
done
5
that.
in the morning. Yeah, it sucked. So I started reaching out to places, and I didn't even know what to ask at first, and they'd tell me what their budget was. So I came in really low, which meant I was working a lot. So yeah, the first year I did 141 gigs, and it took me a while to get my legs and figure out, you know, the secrets of the longevity, you know, so you don't burn out. You know, little tricks I tell young kids. I'm like, look, when they tell you got a tab, that's just enough rope to hang yourself with.
Exactly.
Like,
I know a couple of bands that have literally drank their tab away and everything that they made that night. You know, when at the end of the night, if you get handed a bill, you went overboard.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I've seen that happen to some really great bands that.
Well, you know, a lot of people don't realize that with every alcoholic beverage, you lose 10 decibels of hearing.
See, no, I've never.
Which is why, that's why drunk people talk so loud. The other thing you got to realize is that sound engineers, they might, you know, smoke weed when they're mixing and mastering, but they're not going to be drinking. They'll never do that. Not good ones, anyway.
No. Well, and I'm friends with a lot of those guys, and they're all herbally enhanced. So
exactly.
And you know, right. I get that, and I mean, back when I partook. I mean, I worked in a recording studio when I was in high school, and I would always, the guy I worked for would be like, "Dude, I need you to go outside and get high real quick because I need you to come in here and I need you to set that board perfect." Because I would hear things. I could hear little nuances that he couldn't,
Right.
even as the guy that owned the thing. So he was like, come in, and everybody, like, they'd pay me in weed to come set their stereos up back in the day. I need this
Nice.
EQ set perfect. And I'm like, okay, because I knew what that meant.
That's awesome.
So who were some of your influences?
Who were some of what?
Your influences musically.
Man, it's all over the place, and some of them I'm kind of embarrassed to even say. But coming up, we lived in Belgium and France when I was 8 to 10 years old, and so I was getting hit with a lot of just what was popular back then, which was some terrible stuff along the lines of like ABBA, but French versions of it. So even further on, Claude Francois and just stuff. I remember that guy. He was found to be electrocuted in the bathtub. And my mom and dad at the time, they were just like, shit. They knew that it was like he had been doing some inappropriate adult stuff.
Yeah.
Apparently with an appliance, and electrocuted himself in the bathtub. Anyway, long story short, not to get off topic. I grew up with all kinds of stuff, from the Connells and the House Martins to the Replacements to all kinds of stuff. Tom Waits, Bob Dylan has probably been one of my biggest influences. I don't know why, but I think it was because of the poetic aspect of his music, and poetry was always something that just really worked in my brain. I remember being in English class and going through poetry, and everybody would just sigh and moan, and the teacher would read a poem and be like, okay, what do you guys think this was about? My hand would shoot up, and I'm like, oh, it's really easy. And people were just blown away, like, how in the hell did you get that from that? But then I'd look at calculus and trigonometry, and it was like chicken scratch on a paper. So,
Absolutely.
Our brains work differently, I guess.
Yeah. My wife would have loved to have had you as a student. She's a published poet, but she's a professor, and she's like, I wish kids would understand or even try to grasp poetry. And
right.
She gets that rare one, student like you were, that they get it. It just works. They think in that mindset, and then she's like, okay, that made up for all the others. So
right.
So yeah, it's not an easy thing, and not everybody can do it.
Well, it worked for me, and I felt like Bob Dylan's music was just, not trying to overly play. And there are some bands that, a band like Rush, you have to sit back for a second and realize that while they have strong lyrical components, what they're really doing is putting on an incredible display of articulation, of the precision of music. And then there are other people that it's not about the precision of music, but more about the vibe and the flow,
Or then you take Queen, and Brian May wrote symphonies that he produced as rock and roll.
Right.
Which, if you ever look at the music for some of the, how it's supposed to be played for Queen stuff, you're like, holy shit, what did I just get myself into?
Right.
I'll tell you what, let's jump into some bare bones.
Okay.
What is your favorite guitar to play?
My favorite guitar player?
No, that you play. Your favorite guitar.
Oh, my favorite. Well, I'm kind of torn. So I started off on really crappy guitars, and I have three that I lean on. One's a Guild GAD 50, which I bought in Portland, Oregon. And then after that, I bought a 1967 retro reissue Martin D35, which is my current one that I play all the time. And then about a little less than a year ago, I bought a 2006 Martin HD28. So if I put them side by side and I clean the necks and put on new strings, it's a game changer. I haven't been playing the HD28 very much lately, and the strings have gone a little dead. So the D35 just sounds incredible now. And I think it's because I've been playing it so much. But even though I've had the frets replaced on it once, I can start to see there's a little bit of wear on the first 5 frets. So I'll probably have to put it in the shop with the luthier for a while, and I'll have to have my Guild and my HD28 as the go-to. The HD28 has scallop bracing, So it gives a little bit of a almost an echo, like a vibraphone sound to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a different wave pattern in what comes out. It's really interesting. But you know, first world problems. I mean, both the two Martins are definitely my favorites. I have a couple of electrics too, but I don't really play those. I usually loan those out to guys who are backing me up. I found at this age that rather than go and really learn a bunch of scales and become technically proficient as a lead player is probably something that I just don't need to do. There's a bunch of guys, especially here in Charleston, that play really, really well. And if you've just got the basic charts up, you know, here's the chord patterns, here's what we're doing, and you step back and you give them room to feel it, wow.
Yeah.
You know, it's incredible. But my two electrics are both Gibsons. One's a Les Paul Jr. I bought in 1996, and one is a 1976 Gibson Marauder, which is the guitar that I think Paul Stanley from Kiss played all the time.
Nice.
It's pretty awesome. Both are garnet in color, not a choice, just the way it happened to happen. I'd probably buy a Telecaster if I was going to play all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Martins are kind of my sound. You know, I kept pushing the envelope and I wanted to see what else was out there. And I found, you know, Froggy Bottoms and Collings and all these, you know, boutique guitars. There's a shop here in town. You can go strum on some of them. Dalton and Hess or whatever. And, you know, you're talking about stuff that starts around $5,000-$6,000. And I just don't want to be that living meme, you know, that guy who's got a $5,000 instrument that he puts into a $500 car to go drive to a $50 gig.
Oh, exactly.
Ass backward musician, yeah. I'd say the Martins.
I've always been a big fan of Taylor's just because of the tone and richness of it. But I mean, there's nothing wrong. I mean, I love a Martin too. So I mean,
I think you're one or the other. I found my Martin certified Martin luthier friend who also works on Darius Rucker's guitar. He's in Columbia, South Carolina. His store is called Strings Attached. If you ever need a good luthier and you're in the Columbia area, Jeff Merck, he's the guy to go to. But his go-to guitar is a Taylor as well. And I think I have a stigma against Taylor in my mind because all the greats from the 70s came up playing Martins, you know, and then Taylor hit the scene and they seemed to really click with all the church guys, which I'm not a church guy. Yeah. So I was
I get that. We'll see.
But there's no denying that they make incredible guitars. So in all honesty,
my reason for the Taylor thing is the first time I saw Daryl Scott play live and he plays Taylor's, the richness and tone and what the sound that one man can get out of one of those guitars with his skill set. I mean, it sounds like you've got four guys playing.
Right.
So, I mean, that bar got set really, really high. So that's, right. You know, that was a, you know, maybe it wasn't a fair, you know, comparison. All right.
Well, it's interesting when you see who does play Taylor's. You know, if you step back and, you know, even Sam Beam from Iron and Wine in his latest video, he's sitting there holding a Taylor. And it's just kind of, the Martin was kind of the holy grail. You know, everybody from Eric Clapton to Bob Dylan to Neil Young to, you know, everybody was playing Martins in the beginning. That was just kind of the go-to.
Well, in the whole bluegrass scene, everybody plays Martins.
Right.
In the early country,
But yeah, there's no denying. My chiropractor put a $5,000 Taylor in my hands that he bought recently, and it was pretty perfect.
All right, so what's a band that you're into right now?
You know, as a musician, who am I listening to right now? Tyler Childers, we talked about earlier. I really enjoyed his stuff. He's not really a band, although I think he's playing with a band now on tour. Tedeschi Trucks is a band I really enjoy a lot. Well, you know, enjoy just Derek Truck's guitar tone is amazing. And I appreciate the fact that he plays without any effects or pedals. You know, he's got all his tone coming from the guitar and the amp. And of course, I'm brain dead right now as you're asking me that because, you know, I listen to stuff all over the place from, you know, kind of neo-pop because I have to do a lot of covers. So, you know, it could be something like the Strumbellas, you know, and you're playing this kind of guns in my head kind of pop song to Johnny Cash, Boy Named Sue. You know, you're all over the place.
Yeah, you kind of have to be. All right.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we can jump on into the next one. What is your all-time favorite book?
All-time favorite book.
Hey man, I've had everything from Clifford the Big Red Dog to, you know, some really deep, heavy stuff. So,
yeah, it's funny when I really was at my most studious point in life. I was reading a lot of quantum mechanics and metaphysics. I remember the book, The Dancing Wooly Masters, by Gary Zukav really stuck out to me. You know, and then through time, I've read all kinds of stuff from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to, you know, I don't really know if I have one favorite book. I'd say one of my favorite movies is A Boy and His Dog, which is a cult classic. That and A Clockwork Orange. But A Boy and His Dog was about it was actually Miami Vice. Remember that the guy, the main character there? What was his name?
Don Johnson. Yeah.
It was actually his first role in a movie, and it's with him and his telepathic dog living in a post-apocalyptic world, and there are these elevators that take you to the underground, and everyone in the underground has trees, but there are no trees above ground, and all the people underground are sterile, and somehow or another, Don Johnson makes it down below, and they find out that he's fertile. So he's a sex slave to all the women. And at first, of course, he loves it, and then he just gets torture, right? And he escapes out of there with one of the girls, and they're above ground into the apocalyptic part. And she's getting really, really hungry, and she keeps looking at the dog like, let's kill your dog and eat him. And the final scene is Don Johnson with his dog sitting there, and they are talking back and forth because he's telepathic. And there's a fire burning, and they're eating something, but it's just a boy and his dog that's left.
Wow. You know, I've never seen that. I don't even think I've heard of it. But damn it, now I've got to go track it down.
It's some serious cult stuff, man. It's really, really good.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question for you. Pulled pork or brisket? Do you have dry rub or what kind of sauce?
I'd have to do dry rub. I'm a dry rub guy. I know there's a big controversy between mustard base and tomato base when it comes to barbecue sauce. But I was never much of a big meat eater. And I'm still not. I love the taste, but it just doesn't agree well with my body.
Yeah.
It gives me terrible heartburn. But when I do indulge, my wife is from Croatia, and I got turned on to some other world stuff with meat. And, you know, it's hard to beat going through the back roads of Bosnia and pulling over on the side of the road where these guys have slow roasted the lamb for 8 hours. And you have a nice cold lager, which I'm not even a lager fan. I like ales and IPAs, but when you're in that hot weather and you get nothing but the French fries and that slow roasted lamb falling off the bone with a beer, it's about as good as it gets.
Man,
so
that
I
sounds
learned,
incredible.
Yeah, that was just like mouth-watering stuff there.
Exactly.
But I learned from them the art of crispy and really charred meat. And I grew up in food and beverage where, you know, we were talking shit about your table if they ordered anything above medium, you know, medium rare to rare. You know, you were trailer trash if you wanted it well done. And that's just a cultural thing. But when you understand it cooks a piece of meat to where it's super crispy on the outside and still tender and moist on the inside because they weren't cooking it to order. You're in a restaurant, you're cooking that entree in, 15, 20 minutes. This is an 8-hour process, that's otherworldly. I'm not sure if I deviated from your question there.
No,
but,
you just made me really want lamb.
Right.
Okay, what was the first record that you bought for yourself or picked out to be purchased for you?
Trying to think back that far. I guess it would have been Bob Dylan's Highway 61 Revisited. Probably so. Or even before that, that was in the mix, but I was also into a bunch of weird stuff like the Gun Club and Soft Cell. There was this movement, in the 80s of this like British invasion of music that we were getting, and everybody was trying to be as different as they could, and we had living in a small town like Spartanburg, if you're able to listen to something like The Cure, and you're driving around in your car, and you're getting into some really obscure stuff, and you see all the folks around you who are stuck in a time warp of doing things the same way for 4 generations.
Right.
It kind of gave you a sense of liberation, and then I remember also my friends, turning me on to Hank Sr. and the importance. They're like, now Hank Jr.'s good. Don't get me wrong, but Hank Sr. is where you need to focus.
Yeah, that's
and
where
so
the
I got hit
musicianship
with
is.
all kinds of stuff. I was going from Aha to Waylon Jennings and what.
Well, actually, that's a really good combo, and I'm still to this day a Cure fan. So, and love Soft Cell as well. Depeche,
right?
I mean, come on, we can keep going. We can have a whole Gen X conversation just based around music if we wanted to.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Depeche Mode. I remember coming down to the beach. I had long hair in high school, and I'd come down with my girlfriend, and she was all into OMD and Depeche Mode and all this stuff, and I would listen to that with her, and that's probably what influenced me on that genre of things. But for myself, I was actually more of a metalhead, and I remember I had my entire room postered with stuff that I cut out of Hit Parader and all those magazines. And I remember my dad coming to me once and saying, "Hey, bud, because you got a lot of guys with makeup on your walls.
Do we need to talk?"
I never really looked at it that way. He was like, "No, that's your thing, and you're my son. I love you, no judgment, but let's figure out what's going on here." And then I took them all down. I was like, "Yeah, okay, that is weird."
Yep, that ended that one. Okay, what was your first concert?
My first concert was Van Halen, 1984. It was the Exterminator guy. Was what was the name of that tour? I'll think of it in a second. But I remember a friend of mine and my sister's was this older guy. And he said, "Hey, y'all, I have extra tickets." He's kind of a loner dude, but he could drive. And he was like, "Do you want to go?" And we were Mormon at the time. But we were born Catholic. And, we had kind of gotten into the church when we were in Europe, in Belgium and France, because the missionaries spoke English. And so we came back to the States and didn't really realize the implications of being Mormon in the Deep South. And it was weird. So we weren't very active. But this guy invited us. And so my parents were like, they knew he wouldn't be drinking or smoking and he'd be responsible to drive. So we went. And of course, I was like 14 and they were passing a joint around in the, out there in the nosebleed seats. And I was like, hell yeah, I'll take a hit of that.
Right.
It was interesting, but that was my first concert. David Lee Roth was there with them. And it was a great show.
Awesome. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oof, that's hard. because I got kids now, we have watched every single Star Wars movie, but I grew up on Star Trek, the Tranya. Give me the Tranya. That's a tough one. If I had to choose, though, probably Star Wars, because I remember when the very first Star Wars came out, we were living in Belgium. And I was a kid, probably 8 or 9 years old. And my dad took me and my sister. We were 14 months apart. And he said, y'all, Mom doesn't want to go, but we're going to the movie theater. And so I saw the very first Star Wars in the theater in Belgium.
That's awesome.
So my dad's passed away, and it's sentimental for me, but, the action was, and he was just, I remember, blown away, over the top.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's kind of I've seen every one of them in the theater since the very first one. My dad took me to the first few, and then he lost interest, but he didn't realize what kind of monster he created.
Right. Well, and both my children, who are now 5 and 10, they identify with the dark side.
Same.
They're all about, Darth Vader, the whole 9 yards.
I rock a Vader tattoo, so I get your kids, man. Okay, this is a 2-part question. What is your jam song? That one that it doesn't matter how many times you've heard it, you're singing at the top of your lungs and the volume's going to typically go up. Then on the converse of that, what is your guilty pleasure song? The one that you don't like to admit that you love as much as you do.
Well, I guess as far as the jam song, I would probably, actually on both of those, I'd probably go with original, songs. I could touch on the cover stuff. The Weight, I play, by the band, I play that with harmonica and guitar. And I find that whenever I have a crossover of an audience that I'm having a hard time feeling out what they want, do they want Angel from Montgomery? Do they want, A Boy Named Sue? Do they want Guns in My Head? What do they want? Under the Milky Way, Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen. I cover all that shit. What am I getting at? But when you pull out The Weight, it's something about it you can really dig in deep, and it kind of brings everybody together. I've seen indie kids, grandparents, children, people that you just never would imagine.
They just stop.
They stop and they get into it. That and No Woman, No Cry by Bob Marley. I find that I do that with harmonica too, so I put a weird twist on it. But otherwise, to speak to that, I'd say probably You Can Drink My Whiskey is one of my favorites that I've written, and I always like to do that. And it seems to get a lot of applause when I play live, which I'm grateful for because, again, these aren't ticketed gigs. They're mostly, cover gigs. But and then one that I don't like to admit that I like is a song that I wrote called Push, which I evoke some falsetto and I do harmonica, and it's really a distant, dark song. I don't like the happy stuff.
I don't either.
It sounds terrible. But like the Jack Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
he's a very talented guy. He's a very talented singer. I love what he does with having a very ecologically friendly studio. I love so much about the guy. Surfer, it's a cool guy. But that just kind of whimsical, happy music, it just bores the shit out of me. And that's why I didn't like playing Wagon Wheel.
God, I hate.
I like the Old Crow
man.
Medicine version of that. Is okay.
I did.
I appreciate the fact that Bob Dylan. What's that?
I used to like that song.
Well, I never really liked it because, again, I had to learn it and play it, and the people that wanted it were the same people that shout out titles to songs, but they never say, they never request it. They never come up with any modicum of politeness and say, excuse me, you sound great, but could I make a request? Instead, they just shout out, El John, or whatever they want to shout out at you.
Freebird.
So right. So I was playing a restaurant venue recently, and all the windows and the doors were open. So it was like to the street. So they had garage doors. So I'm basically playing on the sidewalk, and one of those tour carriages comes by, and they stopped, and the game was on the TV, so the people on the carriage could look in and see whatever big game this was. And I remember they said to the people on the carriage, if you're interested in the score, there's the TV. And I saw some people on the carriage looking and trying to squint to see what the score is. And I was in between songs, so I just announced the score. I said, hey, for you folks on the carriage, it's whatever to whatever. Looks like you guys are trying to figure out the score. And they laughed, and then somebody yelled out, Freebird. And I just stopped, and I said, my good people, because you're here visiting our beautiful town, I care to show you some politeness and respect. But your request usually involves a middle finger,
or $500.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, it's in the book. Don't get me wrong, but you better come with the tips. Same with the with Wagon Wheel. I got to where I got pretty evil with that song. I hate to admit it, but people would always want to get up and dance. Yeah. And I'm sorry, but unless it's a slow song, I don't like to see people dancing in front of me. It's a distraction. I'm not a party band kind of guy. I'm a folk singer ultimately. And I watch these people get up and dance. So I learned to change the timing just a little bit.
So they
slow it down and speed it up. So they would always be out of sync and have to stop and try to get back into the beat. Very satisfying.
And they look ridiculous, and you've got to win.
Yes.
Okay, do you have a life mantra or like a little personal saying that you can identify with?
Yeah, one that's been hitting home a lot recently. Probably no good deed goes unpunished.
I love that.
I hate to say it, but damn if I don't try to be a good person. Every time it backfires.
Yeah, I get it. I get that all too well. Okay, besides yourself, who should people be checking out musically right now?
I think Tyler Childers is definitely up there on the list, along with Sturgill Simpson.
I'm seeing both those guys in March.
Yeah, I know, you lucky bastard. Unfortunately, I've been so engrossed in music, I haven't really checked out as much stuff as I should. Tedeschi Trucks, of course, these are all stuff that people already know. Avett Brothers are getting really beat up on their reviews, but I'm going to see them play when they come here, I think in April anyway. And then as far as up and coming, I'd say check out the talent in your local city. There's so much talent in every town. If you just give people a shot and sit down and listen, you'd be surprised. I think there's a lot of local musicians that, Leon Bridges, too, is another guy that's really, I think he's really got something special. Are you familiar with him?
No, I'm not. But I'll
check out his song, River. Leon Bridges, he's an African-American singer. I guess he's from Memphis or in that area somewhere. But he's really doing some stuff kind of like, Gillian Welch. I'm sure you're familiar with her, but I'm surprised all the time at how many people aren't familiar with Gillian Welch. And then trying to think of who else. Well, brain's freezing up right now. So
no worries. Okay, if you had a spirit animal, what would it be and why?
It's funny you should say this because I just posted something about this on social media about a month ago, and it was a 102-year-old tortoise who had had so much sex that he kept his species from going extinct. And I put, that's my spirit animal.
Right on.
Old, just super. No, outside of that, it would probably be a bear, I guess. I've always identified with bears for some reason.
That's awesome. Okay, Chris, I know we need to start wrapping things up. You got any shout outs you want to give?
Oh, shout outs. Man, everybody out there in the local music scene in South Carolina, for keeping the hustle going, keeping the scene alive. It's, one person can't keep live music interesting. It takes all of us. My hat's off to any and everyone listening to this and folks who are contributing on a local level. I think that's where it starts. And I think that's the most important part is the organic local music.
Right on. Well, all right, folks, thank you guys for tuning in. And as always, be good and kind to one another and support local music. Get out there and do something good. Thanks for listening.
12 empty pails couldn't carry the tears from the heartbreak and pain you have seen in your years. You walk away, they stare at your back. It's a matter of life and it's a matter of fact. Your life's for living, it ain't for changing. Your soul's for loving, it ain't for saving. You can't shape the river, you can't shape the flow. Don't change your heart, babe, don't change your soul, I said.